I've seen just about every major Christopher Nolan film, with a few exceptions. And the thing that I love about him as a filmmaker is that he always has some little trick up his sleeve. Do you remember the scene from The Prestige when Michael Caine explains the 3 acts of a magic trick? You've got the pledge, show something ordinary, like a bird, the turn, show something extraordinary, like making that bird disappear, and finally, the prestige, the most important part, show the bird reappear. Now, this idea isn't from Christopher Nolan. It comes from the book The Prestige, written by Christopher Priest. And Priest really isn't describing how a magic trick works. What he is describing is how a good story works. In a story, the writer presents an ordinary character, has extraordinary events happen to that character, which they have to overcome through change, and then you could have a prestige. Not all good stories have a prestige moment, but this is an extra plot twist that the writer introduces late in the story that recontextualizes everything the audience thought they knew about the character they've been watching. To take an example directly from The Prestige, this is the moment when we realize that Christian Bale's character, Alfred Borden, is not one man, but actually a set of twins who masquerade as a single person so that they can perform their flawless magic trick, the disappearing man. Every scene featuring Borden now takes on a new meaning. And it's actually fun to rewatch these movies knowing the twist is coming. You see the whole movie in a new light, like it's been completely reinvented. Nolan is usually great at these final act twists, these prestige moments, usually, but not always. Having seen Oppenheimer, I think there's a pretty good final act twist, but not in the way you're probably thinking. I mean, this movie is based on true events. There's not much that Nolan can hide from the audience. And the narrative twist that Oppenheimer was stabbed in the back by one of his colleagues is one that you would see coming if you happen to know a lot about the true events of this story. But there's a second twist that I think is pretty clever and doesn't happen in the plot, but rather in the way Christopher Nolan chooses to tell his story using techniques like nonlinear narratives and a shifting perspective. And we're going to talk about that, but first we have to do a little setup. We need to talk about how the movie is structured, the themes and ideas this film is discussing, and how those themes are expressed through characters and structure. By the way, this video was requested in the comments of our last video, so if there's any subject you would like us to cover, just let us know in the comments. For now, let's talk about this film is broken into 2 parts titled Fission and Fusion. Scenes from each part happen throughout the movie, so it's not like it's split into 2 acts. It's really a classic nonlinear narrative, but that's not all that's going on here. The audience knows when they are in a fusion timeline because those scenes are filmed in black and white, and fission scenes are filmed in color. One possible explanation for this segmented structure is that the fission color scenes represent the subjective viewpoint of Robert Oppenheimer, telling the audience about his life, and the black and white fusion scenes represent the objective viewpoint of historical fact. While that's a good explanation, I don't really agree with it. More on that later though. We're going to tackle each of these segments individually, but first we have to talk about. This is a film that has a lot to say about power, how people acquire power, and more importantly, how they wield it. We can break the theme of power into 3 broad categories. Number 1, the terrible power unleashed through the creation of the atomic bomb. I got a very Frankenstein's monster vibe with how Oppenheimer interacts with his creation. At first, he's excited by the challenge and the thrill of discovery, but once it's let loose on the world, he's afraid of his creation, what other people do with it, and how they want to use it. He very quickly loses control of his monster. Number 2, you have the paradoxical power of knowledge. Because the characters who are gifted with knowledge, the scientists at Los Alamos, have no say in how their knowledge is used for good or harm. And once they've given this knowledge away, they no longer have any intrinsic power of their own. they're cast aside. And finally, number 3, the lust for power. Metaphorically, the movie discusses this by making reference to black holes, where all power and creative energy sucks inward into a single destructive force of nature. We also see this desire for power in the militaries, countries, and even some singular characters who want to harness the power of the atomic bomb and use it as a force to further their goals. That's not the only theme in this movie, but that's the one I want to talk about. So enough about theme, let's talk about the first section of this film. Fission refers to the splitting of something into 2 or more parts. Fission is the dissemination of power. In this section, the audience sees the major events of J. Robert Oppenheimer's life, from his time studying quantum mechanics in Europe to his experiences as the director of the Manhattan Project, and even beyond the events of World War II. As I said before, this portion is told in a nonlinear narrative. We jump all around the timeline of Oppenheimer's career. We see Oppenheimer as an older man defending his actions before and after the war in front of a board of inquiry. Initially, the audience isn't told why this is happening or who the board represents, but this is a setup for the film's narrative twist. So, why is this section called Fission? Because the power here, Oppenheimer's power, is slowly disseminated and spread widely and ultimately taken from him. At the start of the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer wields a great deal of power and influence. He is a leading expert on the science needed to create the atomic bomb. As such, the government needs him and are forced to overlook Oppenheimer's past as a communist sympathizer. Oppenheimer's power, his expertise, shields him from the consequences of his actions. He is the master of his domain, and anything he asks of the government, they will do for him. He has trouble getting a security clearance because of his past political activities, so he tells his supervisor, General Groves, and in the next scene, he is begrudgingly granted a clearance. He wants to build a city in his favorite part of the country, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and the military builds it for him because it's where he wants to work. No questions are asked of him. No decisions second-guessed. He wants to travel to Chicago to have an affair with his former girlfriend, an avowed communist. And you know what? They don't like it, but they pretty much let him do it because they need him and they need what only he has, his knowledge, until they don't anymore. As the film progresses, Oppenheimer's power is slowly chipped away. During the project, General Grove preaches compartmentalization, spreading the project so no one scientist knows all the secrets. Through this act, new characters are introduced who contradict Oppenheimer, one of which is the physicist Edward Teller, who argues they should build a more powerful hydrogen bomb. Spies within the project leak information to the Soviets, and Oppenheimer's influence slowly wanes as the scientists who work under him begin to question the moral implications of developing the most destructive weapon humanity has ever witnessed. But Oppenheimer's true fall comes after the war. Once he's created the bomb, they are packed up, shipped off, and the world witnesses the devastation let loose on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oppenheimer realizes he has lost control of his creation. He's placed it in the hands of sometimes violent and always power-hungry individuals who occupy the highest offices of government. And so, when he uses his fame to argue for nuclear arms control, those same people strip him of his security clearance and ruin his reputation. So, let's talk about the other half of this movie. Fusion is the act of joining 2 or more things into a single entity. Fusion is the concentration of power. These scenes follow a single character as he attempts to acquire power for the sake of becoming powerful. Unlike Oppenheimer, this character has no specific skill set or knowledge base. He introduces himself early in the film as a simple shoe salesman, a self-made man. This is also a man who advocates for the creation of a hydrogen bomb, a weapon magnitudes larger and more destructive than the bombs used on Japan. This is not a bomb built to end a war, but meant as a threat. For any country who wishes to develop and deploy their own nuclear arsenal, this bomb is a promise of destruction. In the film, the hydrogen bomb represents using power for the sake of power. But let's talk about the reason you clicked on this video. Alright, so there is a scene where I realized the trick that Nolan was playing. It takes place in a fancy dining room during a meeting of the Atomic Energy Commission. And we return to the scene several times during the movie, always in black and white, so Fission, and always from the perspective of the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Lewis Strauss. The scene is a meeting of the commission where they're discussing the recent discovery that in the aftermath of World War II, the Soviets have developed a nuclear bomb. The only way that this was possible was through the work of a spy in Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project. Historically, there was a spy, a German scientist named Klaus Fuchs. Oppenheimer is in attendance, but the audience is not viewing the scene from his perspective. That is until the final time we return to the setting and the scene switches from black and white to color. We're now seeing things through Oppenheimer's perspective, but whose point of view were we in before? This movie is not divided between subjective and objective perspectives. It's divided between two character points of view. And this is where we see those 2 points of view fuse together, with Oppenheimer on one side and Lewis Strauss on the other. The narrative twist reveals that Strauss, who was a friend and colleague of Oppenheimer, secretly hated the man and schemed to have Oppenheimer's security clearance revoked. This truth comes out during Strauss's Senate confirmation hearing, which is the backdrop for all of the black and white Fission scenes. What was Nolan hiding from us? The fact that he's telling half the story from the point of view of the film's main antagonist, Lewis Strauss. Okay, that's all I have for you today, but if you like film breakdowns like these, check out this video I made on writing lessons that you can take away from the Mission Impossible series. As always, keep writing, and later skaters. By the way, if you disagree with anything I said in this video, let me know in the comments, and tell me why.